Good evening, everyone. I'm David Suddjian. Welcome to Bird Bomb's helpful bursts of ID info. Tonight we have Habitat Blast Riparian Zone, continuing in our little series of habitat-focused ways of looking at the bird community of Colorado and how that informs our bird identification skills. So this is episode 37 of Bird Bombs, Habitat Blast Riparian Zone, and I'm happy to be joined tonight by Gigi Zazuela. Gigi will leap in a few times during the presentation as we have our Let It Fly segments. And then if you have any questions or comments as we go along, use our chat feature and Gigi will help with that at the end of our time together tonight. So, it didn't take me long when I began birding to figure out that riparian habitat was one of those key elements of birding habitat that we go to as birders. So it was riparian habitat and wetland habitats together were kind of the gold standard for birding habitat. And if you think about it, a lot of the places that we go for birding are places that include a riparian habitat element. It always adds richness and diversity, and there's a reason why, and it has to do with the water or with moisture that promotes kind of a lush vegetation development and provides for a lot of food, both in insect populations, other kinds of invertebrate populations, as well as things that are living in the water corridor, and all kinds of things that help to make riparian habitat a very rich environment for birds and therefore for birders as well. And here in Colorado, as with almost anything, we have a gradient, right? So we have our eastern prairie region of the state, which has riparian habitat as one of the premier areas of diversity for birds in the eastern part of Colorado. And here we're talking going right up along the Front Range margin. So we have isolated riparian corridors and very dry prairie settings, but also coming up through town along our creeks and drainages and different reservoirs and bodies of water. We have riparian habitat. So ranging up high into the mountains, and this is what we think about in riparian is kind of that it's often following water courses or along their margins. So there's often a corridor kind of effect when we're thinking about riparian habitat on the landscape. But ranging from the lowlands in the prairie, relative lowlands, to way up high to tree line in the mountains of Colorado, we find a riparian zone present. And there's a great variety of riparian settings throughout Colorado, and some of them have some special birds. We're going to focus tonight on really on the greater Front Range area, and I'm going to focus on the breeding season because that's when things are the most diverse, and that's where we are right now in late May, heading into the heart of the nesting season. Migration is still upon us, but there's some wonderful other special riparian settings in other parts of Colorado, and we'll give a nod to those in a little bit as we consider some of the specialties. But we're going to focus in on our Front Range area. Spring, summer season birding will be the way that we focus our bird bombs tonight. All right, so it's always about habitat when we think about bird distribution. That's always part of our lens for understanding where birds are on the landscape and why they are where they are. So the habitat is the environment where a bird finds what it needs to survive. So generally speaking, food, cover, and water in some fashion. And there are a variety of basic habitats in Colorado, and it's not uncommon to have more than one in one small area. So here's a little view right over my home area. And we see indeed some riparian habitat along this small drainage. There's some urban development here, housing development where I happen to live, and some forest habitat up in this canyon. I see some shrubland habitat without trees much, and then of course grassland. So several different habitats represented in a small area helps to make Colorado pretty diverse for birds. So we can consider some of the basic habitat types just to refresh or to renew. Grassland, open areas without trees, basically shrubland habitats that might have some trees involved, but dominated by shrubby layer vegetation. Forest and woodland habitats, such as in the lower left. Lots of forest country in the foothills and mountains of Colorado. And then riparian areas, which will be the focus of our talk tonight, which are the areas that occur along waterways. You can put it just as simply as that. Wetland and aquatic habitats, of course, agricultural areas, urban and rural areas of development, and then, of course, areas dominated by rock and cliff features is yet another basic Colorado habitat type. So what is riparian anyway? So we talk about riparian zones, riparian corridors. You may have seen a diagram like this before, and the word riparian is coming from the Latin riparia, associated with stream banks. And that's really what it's all about. So you have a water element maybe flowing on the surface or even subsurface, or maybe a reservoir edge, a lake edge. And along there would be in different settings some wetland vegetation that's kind of along the water edge, and then shrubs and trees that occupy the floodplain of the body of water. And so we call that the riparian zone, centered around the water area, and it's transitional to upland areas that may be wooded or they may be open and grassy. So the riparian kind of forms an important transitional zone. And because of the presence of water, it's a very rich area. So we can think about generally the presence of lush vegetation, and often it's cottonwoods, willows, other riparian trees of a small subset that form the heart of the trees that make up the area. So it's not really that complex. Cottonwood featured here is a really good one to learn. This is a plains cottonwood, kind of shaped like a heart, or delta, like deltoides is the Latin is the specific epithet for the scientific name for the plains cottonwood, shaped like a little delta there. So riparian, though, is really important in a lot of different ways ecologically, and it's our richest habitat for bird life. And so it's providing a lot of different functions. And one of the things that's going on is that presence of water is promoting lush vegetation and good populations of prey and other food in different regards. So it's a habitat for a very diverse set of species. For riparian habitat, because it's kind of linear, and because it's been disturbed and converted to other things. But because it's kind of linear, it occupies only a small percentage on the landscape, but it's really important. Over 80% of Colorado birds use riparian at some point during the course of their life cycle as they live here in Colorado. And it's a principal habitat for many nesting species. If you want to see yellow warblers, you go find them in riparian habitat, one of our most common riparian bird breeders, and that's the place they love to be the best. And there's a number of uncommon to rare species in Colorado that find their principal home in riparian. Yellow-billed cuckoo is a great example of that, say along the Platte Corridor out in northeastern Colorado. Great place to go try to find yellow-billed cuckoos during, well, pretty much during this time and on into the nesting season. And indeed, riparian habitats provide migrant stopover um, habitat, where places where migrants can spend a little time to replenish their fat supplies as needed, and in the cover provided by riparian and with good foraging resources, important stopover habitat. And that also makes them migrant traps. So especially in open settings, riparian habitat provides places that attract migrant birds, and we say it kind of we trap them there. We see more of them and more variety, and it offers for some great birding opportunities. This image here from Chico Basin Ranch on a DFO field trip just this past Monday, and they had some good birds that day. I think a golden wing warbler was one of them. So we're going to be focusing on Front Range as we go on forward and kind of the focus of my comments, but let's give a little nod to riparian specialties in general. And you see, I've got a long list here of, as you scan through it, you say, whoa, these are good birds. These are some good birds you want to see in Colorado. Some of them not too hard to find if you go to the right places. And you'll notice that many of them are in blue. That's highlighting the influence of the eastern part of the state on the birds that we consider specialties in Colorado. So the prairie region is more eastern, and the isolated nature of the corridors of riparian habitat on the prairie region makes them great places to find some of these more eastern-oriented birds, such as red-headed woodpecker, cardinal, and bobwhite that we have shown here. So things selecting the riparian corridors and thickets on the eastern prairie are a prominent part of our list there, Mississippi kite. And then there's also some special things on the west slope, and one of the stars of the show there is the little Lucy's warbler, which is a riparian associate along some of the creeks in the far southwestern corner of Colorado, down in Montezuma County, for example. Lucy's warbler is really associated with riparian. And then we have some birds that are specialties that are more in montane settings, such as the veery that nests locally in northern, sort of north central Colorado, and the willow flycatcher in some areas in the mountains of Colorado. And I like to think about these front range edge riparian specialties because these are all birds that breed close to my home, but kind of special in our area. Least flycatcher on the upper right, American redstart, red-eyed vireo are examples of some things that I can find in a great riparian part of the Platte and Chatfield State Park and some of their other areas along the Front Range. Those guys are there. So let's consider some of the amenities in the riparian habitat. There's always going to be the elements of the particular trees and plants that live there and the food and cover they provide. But we can also think about particular other things that make riparian a rich setting. And one of the important things is snags. So standing dead trees, um, downed logs are important elements in the riparian setting, and the snags provide, as we saw with our woodpecker video there, places where woodpeckers like to excavate cavities. They provide the first order of cavities in the environment, along with some naturally occurring ones. And then other birds, secondary cavity users, can use holes made by woodpeckers, which are most often in snags or on snag features in trees. Another thing that we're quickly aware of in really rich riparian settings is that there's water nearby. So we have the water habitat itself. I mean, we all need water to drink, right? But there's also things that live in the water that some of the birds like to eat. And some of the birds really are aquatic species that take advantage of elements in the riparian corridor, such as the belted kingfisher that nests in burrows along some of our stream banks. So there's a kingfisher nest burrow tucked up in here, the bird perching out in front, and of course feeding on fish in the stream that it's living along and perhaps at other water sites nearby. And of course, American dipper is one of our star water birds living along our riparian corridors. Another thing that really makes riparian areas rich, it can be the neighboring habitats that are nearby that are providing additional resources. So it makes the whole package a better one as we have adjacent maybe wetland habitats or forest habitats, grassland, or even some of the suburban development that's alongside the riparian corridor. As we all know, sometimes when we're birding, our attention is focused in the yards because that's where some of the birds are. So there is some give and take, sometimes too much take in the interface between development and riparian corridors, but there's also a lively interface happening right there. And part of the situation is riparian habitat is rather complex structurally. It tends to have an understory in the best areas and middle story plants, smaller trees, and then an overstory. Often that's our cottonwoods that we're talking about in most places. And where the riparian is kind of broad, such as we see in two buttes below the dam in the upper right, then there are a lot of opportunities for things to go on. So broad patches of riparian areas with some good habitat complexity are really good. And then, of course, there's the cavities. So we're talking about natural cavities that occur or woodpecker-made ones, but we also have nest boxes as a real element in a lot of the riparian areas that we visit as birders. And generally, that's a real good thing, providing a great resource for some of our nesting birds. Here we have tree swallow, house wren, and western bluebird. So when we think about different areas of riparian habitat, it kind of falls out along an elevational situation. So we have a low elevation riparian, which is various types that we encounter on the prairie, on the plains, coming right up to the edge of the foothills. And this is dominated by plains cottonwood, willows of a couple species, box elder, and we also find it along reservoir margins, such here at Bar Lake. And in some areas, exotic species like Siberian elm and Russian olive are important components of this low elevation riparian habitat. Beavers are a big player too in that environment in many areas. So these are areas we would find like below 6,000 feet, and we want to recognize plains cottonwood as the big overstory tree that's dominant. And then as we move up in elevation, we move into what is called a montane deciduous riparian. It's also dominated by cottonwoods and willows, but the cottonwood tree switches over from plains cottonwood to narrowleaf cottonwood, and some of the other plant composition is a little bit different, but basically it's cottonwoods and willows. And so as you get up in the mountains, and some areas are just dominated by shrubby willows, like you see here in the bottom two images uh, for the riparian habitat bordered by coniferous forest. So we had the low elevation riparian, montane deciduous riparian. There's also a montane coniferous riparian. I'm not going to focus on this any further than to just share. It's about the conifer forest basically coming right down to the water edge along streams, often not very different than the surrounding forest, other than the pleasance, maybe a blue spruce more prominently, and maybe a narrow margin of deciduous willows and maybe aspen and a few other kind of shrubby, small tree kind of thing. So that coniferous riparian is not really so much of our focus and interest tonight. But in the upper elevation area, we find a really neat area that's called willow carr. So this unusual word CARR is basically waterlogged wooded terrain dominated by shrubby willows. So just think about expanses, patches of willows. They could be smaller size, they could be quite extensive in very wet ground. And that area can be very attractive to several bird species up in our upper mountain areas, reaching all the way up towards tree line. You can see it here in the mountains at Brainerd Lake, the willow carr here out on this side, forest on the other side in this case, maybe smaller patches along a wet meadow up near Columbine Pass up in Montrose County. Willow carr, really cool. So here's just a very quick look at just a few tree species because I'm not going to go in depth here on our trees, but we have two important things are cottonwoods. We have the one that's down low, the plains cottonwood, and the one that's up in the foothills and mountains, the narrowleaf cottonwood. Pretty simple up here in this region of Colorado and the Front Range area. So maybe some other species if you go southwest Colorado, but here, very easy plains cottonwood out on the plains, narrow leaf cottonwood in the narrow canyons of the foothills. How about that? And some other important trees are the box elder and peach leaf willow, two other deciduous trees. These are smaller size, mid-range trees that add some of that variety. The box elder with these maple-like samaras, the little helicopter seeds that you can enjoy along the trail. So here we have that kind of typical riparian shape of tall cottonwoods, smaller willows, often next to grass or something different. And a couple of important introduced trees. The Siberian elm is really common in lots of our riparian corridors on the prairie and in the urban metro areas. One of the common trees now along our creeks is the Siberian elm. And then the Russian olive is also an invasive exotic. You can see it in the treescape is showing up as a very pale kind of silvery mid-sized tree. And looking close up, it does have these fruits, the olives, if you will, that are very popular with birds at different, well, when they're available and ripe. A lot of different birds really like that, and Russian olive actually does provide pretty good cover. So it's a mixed bag invasive exotic in that it is invasive and non-native on our landscape, but it also provides some strong resources for birds. So a little bit of a win there in the case of the Russian olive. Siberian elm also can attract a lot of migrants at certain times. All right, so a little lowland riparian 101. One of the first things you'll notice is it takes me more than one slide just to list some of the very basic species of the particular riparian type. So this is really diverse. The lowland riparian is the most diverse habitat for birds, terrestrial habitat in Colorado. So lots of different possible species. I'm just highlighting a few of them here. Some of them super common, like the mourning dove, Downy woodpecker kind of always seems to be around. The blue jay out on the prairie can be very numerous. Western wood pewee ubiquitous in our riparian stands during the summertime. And the bickering voices of Western kingbirds are really what helps to define some of our lowland riparian. And then we have a nice suite of raptors that are nesting in the big cottonwoods for the most part. We have two species that provide nests shown here. Both the red-tailed hawk and the Swainson's hawk in the genus Buteo are both common denizens of riparian habitats in the lowland setting. And their nests are used in turn by great horned owls, which also find help from some other species, but the owls don't build their own nests, so they depend on nests of other birds. And hawk nests are a popular item for them across Colorado's lowland riparian areas. And then we have another bird that depends on other birds as well as natural settings, and that's the American kestrel. It's a cavity nester. So our little falcon is a cavity nester, and it depends on woodpecker holes, flickers especially, and also sometimes natural cavities, nest boxes, and other man-made settings. But little secondary cavity nester there is the American kestrel. So cool suite of raptors. Also some owls out there otherwise. So the eastern screech owl is associated with our lowland riparian forest. Very special bird here in Colorado. All right, so we flipped over to a whole other set of birds as we're touring now in the lower part of the bird book here, swallows on down to the buntings and grosbeaks. And swallows are a really fun part in riparian habitats because they always seem to be somebody around, and sometimes there's several kinds of species. And these are two that are most consistent, the tree swallow and the violet green swallow. And these are both secondary cavity nesters, so they really love woodpecker holes. Nice comparison of their general facial patterns. We'll come to those a little more. And then really kind of special, but not really associated with the riparian vegetation, but more the streamside setting, is a bank swallow, which nests in colonies of multiple holes on vertical riverbanks where they have some stability and they actually can excavate out their own little burrows and they'll reuse them over a number of years. So a colony may be active on the landscape for many years, or it could change as the stream course changes. Bank swallow is pretty special. Another one, or maybe one of our most abundant birds along our watercourses numerically, is the cliff swallow. And they do use some natural settings like this overhang here at Two Buttes, SWA, where these cliff swallows are busy rebuilding nests. But many of their nest sites are along bridges and other structures along our waterways. So they're very common, but they're kind of pulsed around where those features are. And one of the stars, one of the groups as a star of the show at this season, of course, is some of the tropical color that we get to enjoy in the lowland riparian. Really great for Bullock's oriole and yellow warbler in particular, where you have good understory cover, you have yellow-breasted chats, and especially near the foothills, the black-headed grosbeak gets in the mix. Yellow warbler is one of the most common breeding birds in the lowland riparian habitat. And if you look in the lower left here, you can see a female tucked away on a nest that she's still finishing here in some coyote willow. And then notice this little fledgling juvenile yellow warbler, how different it looks from the adults. So for a little while, the yellow warblers aren't yellow at all. So when you're out there looking in June or early July, you might see a gray warbler and say, what's going on? Well, it could be a baby yellow. So I'm going to invite Gigi to join me now. And we've kind of looked at some of the birds in the lowland riparian habitat. And we're going to kind of consider a few of them a little bit further here. And I want you to help me out, Gigi. What do you think we're looking at here?
Alrighty. This is one of my favorite little flycatchers that I think we're looking at. Do you want me to just say?
Whatever you like.
Yeah, I think it's a Western wood pewee, at least the two on the left, because they have that sort of vested type appearance. And I feel like the way it's perched vertically can help me as well on the left-hand side bird. Like just the shape and the way it's sitting, as well as just that faint contrast on the breast.
And they're kind of plain faced too and kind of
Mhm.
gray overall. And they're just coming back to our area now. You've got it right, Western Wood Pewee, and they are still a little slow in returning this year. So, but they're getting there, I hope. And I like how you pointed out this kind of vested look that you can see, and a little bit depends on the lighting and the angle, sometimes whether it shows up. And sometimes you can say it's there, but it's not overwhelming you. It's like a very casual vest. How about that? And I notice also that on the peewee, the sides are really evenly colored. So it kind of gives kind of a plain overall look. Where do you usually see peewees perching? Do you notice that difference from anything else or what they like to
I
do?
think about where the sort of lookalike species likes to perch, which is at the like very high trees and tends to stay high. So I feel like Western wood pewees might favor the mid on a horizontal branch. And if you've ever stared at a peewee for long enough, you'll see it do that classic fly catching coming back. I don't associate them with the very tip top of the tallest tree. I think more olive-sided flycatcher for that.
Yeah, I think you got that right. So they definitely like the top of the world, and the peewees are really good about perching kind of in the open on the side, so you can actually enjoy them if you have a moment, and they may kind of cooperate by returning to the same general spot in kind of an open setting. And the nests are placed in the open too, and can be found if you watch birds either building or a little bit later. The nests aren't hidden away; they're out in the open on a limb, and so they may blend in visually, but the birds will often lead you to the spot. So yeah, the olive-sided flycatcher bigger. And notice it's got kind of mottling on the sides of its breast versus that clear breast for the pewee. Then the little Impedinax flycatchers we won't worry about too much, but they're much more active and tend not to be in one spot for very long to get to enjoy them.
And with Duskies, I don't know if we get into it, but they're very habitat specific, whereas I would expect to see and hear Western wood pewee in different habitats throughout Colorado versus I know Duskies are really site specific. I know you have a spot in Chatfield you like to look for them in that they come back to year over year, but they're very picky about that.
A lot of the Impedinax flycatchers, when they're in their breeding spots, they're particular habitats. Unlike, like you're saying with the pewee, it's more general, so it likes a variety of different riparian settings and some other woodland settings too, like ponderosa pine. So here we got another species to look at, and I think we even got a little video here in the middle. And so, what do you notice on this bird? What do you think this might be?
Well, it's a vireo because
Okay, why? How
you're
do
not
you
going to
know
like
that
this
right
answer
away?
because it looks like a vireo. No.
Okay, well,
Um,
that's all right.
I think the head shape is different. Like just that sort of like very round, like round but not so circular. Obviously the supercilium and the sort of faded appearance at the eye stands out to me. In the video, I couldn't quite see what you were, if
Yeah.
you wanted to point something out, but I know they're just super active. They don't sit still for too long, especially the red-eyed vireo, which I'm not seeing
Okay.
here. Um,
So what was it about the face pattern? And you think this is which species?
I think this is a warbling vireo. I think they both are. They have a
Okay.
delicate sort of eyebrow, almost washed out, kind of fades. Um,
Faded out. I like that.
yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
versus I don't know if we're going to talk about it, but the red-eyed vireo is the other one we get in Colorado, maybe
So
less.
here's that one. So I put up
Oh,
two
thank you.
images of
Yes.
that. Yeah. So yeah, that kind of arched eyebrow, and I like how you're describing it as kind of faded out, like it's kind of wiping off the makeup or something like that. Maybe with that little pale area underneath, also kind of faded out. And one of those vireos without any wing bars. So unlike say a Plumbeous vireo has wing bars, the little warbling does not. And I put vireos less active compared to like warblers. They tend to like
True.
stand in one spot for a little bit longer, but they can be very active and they're so good at hiding among the leaves that they just kind of blend in with the kind of greenish yellowish tones up there sometimes.
Yeah. And on red-eyed vireo, there's also just almost a fierce eyeline look with black both like above and right below the eye.
Right. So more strong eye line and that cap with that dark line there. Yeah, fierce is a good way to put it. So that's one of the ones that's fun to encounter because we don't have those many places. Of course, the eastern and western are two different forms, which might be split into different species one day. And essentially, it's a prairie versus foothill question. Although in the metro area, there's a blending, and the western is maybe more pronounced. But anywhere out in the prairie, you're dealing with the potential eastern warbling vireo. So we'll come back with you in just a moment, Gigi. And so let's consider the montane riparian a little bit. It's a shorter list, a lot of the same species, but some new ones are added in, which I've highlighted in yellow. And in some of the lowland areas, we can find our two hummingbirds regularly, but especially in the foothills setting, the black-chinned and broad-tailed kind of mix, and it's kind of fun to think about those side by side. And if you have a nice look, the males aren't so difficult. Females are a little more similar, but we'll just notice for now the nice kind of warm tones on this female broadtail versus the cooler lack of kind of pastel warm tones on the female black-chinned. One of the special birds of the montane riparian is the red-naped sapsucker. Not only a beautiful bird, but it has this great uh, behavior that it has of drilling sap wells, which it visits to drink sap and to eat insects that are attracted there. It also eats the cambium of the wood. And those sap wells are then visited by other birds, hummingbirds, warblers, and others that are coming for sap or insects that may be attracted there. So sapsucker are important ecologically that way. Plus, it provides a lot of holes for our cavity nesting birds, the swallows in particular, and even things like the northern pygmy owl, which is one of our premier owls. Not so easy to find, but in the montane riparian, the pygmy owl is one of the souls that lives there. Some of the really common little birds are two chickadees, the blackcap really associating with riparian in the mountains, and the mountain chickadee occurring more broadly, but as you get higher, it's a common riparian bird. And the little ruby-crowned kinglet, notice how tiny it is. Little features would be like a single white wing bar. See, the upper one is there, but it's covered over by some of these feathers, so it often doesn't show. And so one white wing bar followed by a dark bar, really compact size, needly little bill, broken eye ring. Hard to get a good look like this in the breeding season because they like to be up in the trees, but sometimes they'll blow their top, and you're real excited when you get a chance. And the singing birds often will do that. A little volcano. Another really special bird in the montane riparian zone is our American dipper. They do range out even in the breeding season just a little bit into the away from the very edge of the front range, but really it's up a foothills mountain bird, and they build their nests on natural rock faces, like on the lower right. There's a nest site in there, and a lot of the nests underneath bridges now, so a man-made feature, human-made feature that the dibbers are taking advantage of. Several warblers are present in the montane riparian. You want to kind of think a little bit about habitat parts, but all these guys are possible. The Wilson's likes to be up higher. The McGilvrays likes nice dense cover down low. Yellow's kind of everywhere up to a point. Yellow rumped is our most widespread of the warblers nesting in the mountains of Colorado. So finally, we reach up into our highest, what I'm going to say, our kind of highest riparian habitat, which is willow carr. Now, some is down lower, 8,500, 9,000 foot range, but a lot of the really good stuff is up a little higher and even up near tree line. And it's maybe just mostly willows. And these are birds that really enjoy being in that willow habitat. Remember, carr is that montane willow wetland dominated by shrubs rather than taller trees. And so there's several species that find their peak occurrence or one of their peaks in that habitat, and these four sparrow species are among them. So it's a great area to enjoy species if you get up into willow carr. Fox sparrow and white crown the biggest, and then Lincoln's and song are a little smaller. But they all do a lot of singing, so that can help. And in fact, I'm going to invite you, Gigi, to come back in here, and let's consider these sparrows a little bit further.
I'll start in the top right just because I'm loving the wind in the breeze of the crown of the
Okay.
crown sparrow. I'm taking a new birder under my wing and we're birding every week. And this is a sparrow that she can ID. So I love that. It immediately helps us out. Just that white crown and that bird is specifically is showing it really well. I've actually never seen one floofed up like that.
Yeah, and notice the bird to the left is showing kind of a cross pattern on its crown, and that's the back of its head as it's preening its breast, and that's another thing is that the white crown stripe crosses with the white supercilia to make that kind of cross stripe in the back. So that's kind of fun to look at. It's a big sparrow, no streaking on that one.
Yeah, that just blew my mind, by the way. I didn't know about the X marks the spot on the back of the head.
Yeah,
I'm gonna try
yeah.
to notice that in the field next time.
In fact, if you ever see the back of a head of a white-throated sparrow, which also has black and white stripes, that don't cross, they just run straight down the back of the head, so no cross there. So uh, if you're ever stuck with just that view, you can solve the ID.
Good to know.
What
Um,
else strikes you here
on the white crown sparrow?
on any of them?
Oh, okay. Down below, I'm seeing several photos of song sparrows. They have the streaky breast that comes to kind of a centralized dot. And I have found that sometimes it varies, like the intensity of the streaks and the dot, but they have that dot that kind of conjoins all the streaks. They
Okay,
also have that gray side of the face on the cheeks.
right.
You can see it more in that middle bottom bird.
This guy.
Yeah.
Okay, so white crowned and song.
Then, if we pan to the left, I'm immediately noticing that buffy color at the top of the breast and really fine, delicate streaks. Someone once said, and I've never forgotten, that it kind of looks like little paint brush strokes, very delicately placed there. And the streaking stops right before the belly area. But in
Okay,
all three, you can see that warm color, even if there's like a little variance. Like I feel like the top one looks kind of yellowy versus down below looks more peachy. But it's once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's really
and
helpful.
so this is which species?
Oh, Lincoln Sparrow.
Lincoln Sparrow, and
They're
it's got that
tiny.
kind of buffy face instead of the
Yeah.
gray of the song sparrow, a little more delicate, often
Smaller.
kind of cresty on the crown. And I'll kind of give away the last one here, but it takes us to one that we don't really see as often as some of these others.
Hmm.
They're a little more localized, at least in our kind of Front Range area of Colorado. You got to generally get up kind of high, and that's this big fox sparrow. Have you encountered them in the higher parts here in Colorado?
I've wanted to encounter one in Colorado. I know you had one that you was visiting your feeder, but was a very fickle friend of yours.
Yeah, fox sparrow is kind of our bigger, chunkier sparrow, and they have a kind of not the face pattern situation going on with these other species. It's a more plain, a gray-headed color is the one that we have for our slate-colored fox sparrow.
I have a question. I was going to ask about the bill on the fox sparrow. Like to me, it looks heavier than the other bills of these other sparrows on the slide. Is
Yeah,
that something you would use?
as a rule, fox sparrows have bigger bills than your average sparrow, and often they're a little bicolored. It's a little hard to see in these images, but the top mandible is darker than the lower mandible. There's different forms of fox sparrow, and they may be split into different species, but the one that we have breeding here in Colorado is a slate-colored fox sparrow. We also get the red fox sparrow and the sooty fox sparrow at other times of the year. But the slate-colored fox sparrow is a higher elevation breeding sparrow associated with the willow car.
Have you got one yet this year?
I don't think so. Nope. So something special to look forward to. They have a wonderful song. So loving how these guys are all really willow associated. So let's let it fly a little bit with some nice riparian swallows.
Yes, I love the swallows. I love the swallows. On all of these swallows, there's two species obviously we're seeing. I love how the primaries reach the almost reach the tail, and that can vary between them, but that's like just a nice feature on the swallows where the primary feathers are almost as long as the tail. So even
Uh,
on bad lighting or a far away perched bird, you can kind of maybe rule them in even with how the wings are looking. These are nice ones to talk about because they are kind of a look-alike and an ID challenge, especially because of their flight behavior can be erratic. But on the bottom images, we can kind of notice those details in flight. And I'd like to start all the way on the bottom right, with the white that almost looks like a full band at the end of the tail. It's not, though. It doesn't quite connect, but in flight, it kind of jumps off the page. Some people call them the saddlebags.
right.
But as you can see then, if you pan toward the left, the more iridescent blue-green one in flight, they also have a peak of white coming up. It's just not going to be as pronounced as the violet green.
Yeah, so violet green over here on the right
Yeah.
and tree
And three.
swallow. And yeah, they're just, it does peak up a little bit, but it doesn't form that saddlebag kind of impression and doesn't really grab you. Um,
And the other thing is the face and the eyes and where there's color, where there's white on the bird. Because as beautiful as these birds are when they're perched in gorgeous light, like your two center photos, those are amazing. You can really appreciate the color. We don't often get all those details with swallows in the field. So on the tree swallow, the bluish color is also the backdrop for the eye. There's no white behind the eye, versus on the violet green swallow, their cheeks and eye area have white on it. And in flight, I've been actually pushing myself this season to notice that. I find you can notice that in flight too.
yeah, it does stand out. It totally affects their overall look, even if you don't look at the detail. That dark coming all the way down below the eye on the tree swallow and the violet green having something going on there. And notice I have images of females on here too. And the males in the top middle are very distinctive. But the female, like violet green, is grayer and kind of washed out, but she has the same pattern of things going on. We can't see her rump, but the white coming up behind the eye, and on the female tree swallow, she's brown in coloration versus his blue, blue to blue green color.
I have a question. I feel like on the female tree, she looks so clean, almost like a desaturated version of the tree versus the female violet green looks a little messier. Is that classic, or do you think that's just that image? For the
Um,
green, I just feel like it's smudgier versus
well, I
really
think that the breast being a little bit poofed out is kind of contributing a little bit there, but they do look kind of smudgy and messy, so they're not as clean
clean.
as the female trees in terms of the demarcations and all.
Would you ever use the tail shape on these two to like ID? I notice in the bottom center photos, it looks different.
Right, the tree is more forked
Hmm.
compared to the violet green, and sometimes you can do that. Often you're able to look at one of these other features, and tail shape can sometimes be tricky depending on what the bird is doing at that moment with its tail, whether it's fully spread or closed or whatever. And the swallows, of course, when they're flying, are very maneuvering all over the place, and you get a lot of different tail positioning going on. So you'd have to consider that. Um, but
Yeah.
in a photo, that's different, I guess. So,
Have they arrived to Colorado yet?
oh yes,
Great.
we've got all these guys doing their thing. Starting out, it's been kind of a slow spring so far. So let's take it on to another little group here. Um, and obviously, these are not storks or ducks.
No. And you even gave us a hint. Let it hum.
Oh, yeah, that was very nice of me.
That was nice of you. Let's see. I think we're seeing two species. The ones on the left are jumping off the page for me as black-chinned hummingbirds. Um,
What is it you notice first that takes you there?
well, the black chin, but that can be deceiving in the field.
It
Um,
looks to me like the ones on the right have a black shield also.
I know it's deceiving in the field. Um, for me, it's the general face is just darker, blacker, and the
Okay.
face even before the eye is black. And so, I mean, I feel like often this is what they look like in the field. If you're lucky enough to catch a male, catch the light, it's amazing. But yeah, like just saying a dark chin isn't really helpful because look at the other species on the right also has that. Yeah.
Yeah. If the angle of the lighting is poor, they both look black in all over their gorgets. That's what we call that colored area at the throat there, the gorget, and it's all that magenta red or whatever red tone for the broadtail, and the black chin has a black chin and then purple down below. And sometimes, too often, we don't get to enjoy the purple on the black chin. And if the birds turn to the wrong angle, we don't get to enjoy much color on the broadtail either. So you need to be considering that. But you got it right. The black chin has a much darker face than the broadtail. And I think before we consider these females, I think if you look at where like on the gorget of these two male broadtails, it's the top of it and then up to the eye, there's a pale area there. and that's lacking on the black chin. So it creates that dark face versus a pale face on the broad tail.
There's talk of a slightly decurved bill. That has not really jumped out of the page for me in the field. What about you?
I second that emotion because I was just out this past field trip a few days ago, and folks were using that as an ID feature. But I always have a hard time deciding whether I see a straight or a curved, and it's a pretty subtle thing. And
Yeah.
so more often than not, I think you can use some other feature about the bird to get you there. But
There's also, yeah. Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
I didn't even highlight that in my little cheat sheet here.
I noticed, but if you Google it, that comes up allegedly. Whereas, like, I could make a decurved bill out of those broad-tailed images you posted. So I don't
Yeah.
use that one. On broad-tailed, do I use this? Do they have rufous on the tail when they flare it? None of your images do.
They do, and that's a good mark. It's not always easy to see,
Yeah.
depending on where the bird is relative to your angle. But they have orange at the base of the as part of the basal part of the tail feathers, and that's lacking on the black chin. They also are more warm colored underneath. The black chin cool, lacking like the warm pastel tones. And look at the face patterns is different. We've got spotted throat and a little bit of an eye stripe thing, but here you've got this little dusky mask, almost like mascara that's running or something on the face of the lady um, black-chinned hummingbird. So that's a pretty good mark for the female black-chinned when you see it perched, that kind of dusky mask.
And it really is fun to try to figure out. I know when I was first starting out, I just wouldn't even go there. Like, okay, it's a female hummingbird, whatever. But if you slow down and really watch them, especially if they're feeding, you can start to pick up those things in the field. I think it's quite fun to try to narrow it down and determine it.
Yeah, it's good to have those hard challenges. You may not always decide or you may get it wrong sometimes, but the looking closely part is a great exercise. Cool. So I love our little hummers. And this will be, I think, our last thing that we'll consider for tonight. This is a bird that fools a lot of people. A definite riparian associate as well as other kinds of habitats.
Ah, it took me a while. Like I had to, because I did not preview this at all. The one in the middle especially is giving me brown-headed cowbird female.
Okay, great.
The one on the left, that bill looks really curvy. It could just be the image. And then the one on the right, I wanted to turn it into a toy, so let's not even talk about that.
Yeah,
But
the colors are a little different, different lighting maybe affecting it somewhat
the
there.
way in the center image, like the way that bill kind of connects directly to the head and just the shape, it's really and the heavy set bill, brown-headed cowbird.
And the kind of pale head,
Yeah.
it's kind of the palest part of a pale bird overall. Now, not discounting the dark appearance of the upper right, but that could be lighting or different things going on, but it still has that same bill shape.
Hmm.
So good call, female brown-headed cowbird. This is a bird that can stump a lot of people. And part of the thing is that they are kind of in between in their appearance between sparrow and a blackbird, say. And so it can kind of throw you off. But looking at the bill shape is always really important in bird ID, and that can, like, it took you as a key point to the correct ID there. So female cowbird's a little bit tricky. Then, if the males are around, it makes it easier, and they're often displaying. You can see they have a kind of a very pointy look to their heads when they're in a display mode, and sometimes doing some funky things with their body as they sing. So the males are usually not too far away from a female. But this is one of those ubiquitous species that spread throughout the riparian areas in Colorado in its season. So when they come in sort of mid-spring, and then all the way through July and then into early August, and then they'll just disappear because they no longer have any business in all these places as the nesting season winds down, which is why they're everywhere. Take advantage of parasitizing nests, but then they'll move and molt in some areas away from their broad breeding distribution. So cowbird's ubiquitous in season. All right, cool. So I'm gonna say thank you to our many photographers whose images were used for this presentation, and I'm grateful to Gigi for joining in our discussion. And we'll come back with you in just a sec here if there's anything on the questions chat department. But thanks everyone who participated in making this great through letting me use your photographs. Really appreciate it. Couldn't do it without you. And we can already look forward, of course, to our next bird bombs. Staying on the habitat theme, so this will be Habitat Blast Prairie View. So learn about the bird communities in Colorado's prairie settings, some of the most beautiful parts of Colorado coming up on June 26th, and you can already register for that on the DFO webpage. So I'm going to stop screen sharing and we'll see if we have any questions or anything, any comments.
So far, there are no questions or comments, but folks, feel free to drop them in. I have both the chat and the Q&A open. While we wait to see if questions pop in, I'd like to hear more about the sparrows that we discussed specifically, David, and like, would we expect outside of the song sparrow to see the white-crowned and the Lincoln and the song all in the same riparian?
Yes, you can, especially in the nesting time up in that willow-dominated habitats and kind of 9,000, 10,000 toward 11,000 feet. It makes it one of the fun things about visiting those areas because you can have this variety of sparrows, which makes it pretty rich. Because they sing a lot, and so you have these great songs going on all around you, which is a part of the great experience. As you get down lower, it's more the song and the Lincolns, and eventually sort of just the song. Except during migration time, you always have the chance for Lincolns turning up in different spots and white crowns in different places besides their normal mountain breeding haunts. So you have to kind of consider the season. But in the nesting time, you get up in the willow car habitats and you can have the whole suite of sparrows plus the Wilson's warbler and dusky flycatcher and the red-naped sapsucker going off. So it's really fun up there.
Nice. Um, we have some questions coming in. One question from Anita is, are the dippers still nesting?
Yes, they're on the early side of their overall program. They're one of the earlier breeding birds in Colorado. A lot of their nest sites are under bridges and things or along low rock faces on streams that are not accessible to predators. And they can occupy those fairly early in the season. They do just fine with the spring rushing waters. And so often you'll see dipper young out in May or June. So they're definitely in the heart of things still.
Thank you. A question from Christopher. What has been one of your most unusual birds you've seen in the riparian habitat?
Oh gosh.
An
Um,
unexpected bird.
um, I don't know if this answers exactly, but what comes to mind is not really unusual, but I was pleased to learn that it was occurring in this way. Is the Cassin's kingbird, which can be a really common bird in riparian, like along Big Sandy Creek and Elbert into Lincoln County, for example, and some other places in eastern Arapahoe. So we don't get them too much on the front range, so it's a little special that way. You have to kind of go to where they are. But I love their vocalizations. They're just explosive calls, and they're constantly bickering with each other and chasing each other around. And so the Cassin's kingbird is a riparian. One of the things they really like is the big cottonwood riparian out in some parts of the prairie. So that's a good one. But one of the neat things about riparian really is the great variety of rare birds that can turn up because it is a rich, productive habitat for insectivores in particular, and has a lot of great cover. That's where a lot of the banding stations are located because that's where the migrants are. And so Colorado has a big history of a lot of uh, diversity of things that we might consider to be eastern species or like that. So always some rarity is a possibility.
Yes. A favorite riparian migrant trap of mine is Tucker Gulch. I'm wondering if you have any favorites as well.
I really like the areas of the Platte upstream of kind of the upper part of Chatfield State Park or southern part are really fun because they're close to home. And even the riparian that's down below my house is a simple little, not a very big corridor, but I've had a lot of different birds down there over the years. So any place, I'm really in favor of places you can go to on a regular basis and get to know them well, even if they're not so big or extensive. They're easy to get to and you can learn a lot that way. So, and things show up. That's the fun thing about birds.
things they show up. I got a question from anonymous attendee. They must know that I moved to Washington somewhat recently. They're asking if I'm seeing similar species of sparrows in Washington. I actually am. Our most dominating sparrow here is the song sparrow. And the song is slightly different, I find, and their look is definitely different. The subspecies present in Washington is just a lot darker to the point where I've definitely, especially when I first moved here, was doing double takes because it just didn't look like our Colorado song sparrow. The other one I'm hearing and seeing all the time are white-crowned sparrows. Spotted towies are sparrows, and I see them. I saw one Lincoln sparrow. They're not as common. And then my favorite that I've been seeing and hearing is the Savannah sparrow. I'm so used to in Colorado being really out in the grasslands and agricultural type areas where I'm mostly hearing, not seeing. But here I am hearing and seeing Savannah sparrows, which is really neat. They're still sort of down low as like the behavior is very similar or often in a shrub, but I feel a little bit spoiled with those sparrows here.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to see regional differences, how things change, and sparrows are always a fun group because, especially when they're singing, kind of an important element of their life. And interesting, you mentioned different appearances or maybe different subspecies, and that's also a real reality for a lot of our birds. And song sparrow is one of the more diverse in terms of a wide variety of subspecies, say, across our country. And yeah, they can have different colors and different sizes. And birds that are coastal tend to be darker than birds that are in drier settings. So that's maybe something you're actually seeing. It's kind of neat. It keeps you on your toes.
Yes. Do you have time for a
Yeah,
couple more questions? A
I
couple more.
do. Go ahead.
Great. Lynn wants to know what are some of your favorite Eastern Colorado riparian hotspots? Since you mentioned the area upstream of Kingfisher Bridge, but what would be some Eastern recommendations?
Well, it's hard to beat going to Two Buttes, SWA. It's such a beautiful place, and the habitat is tucked down in a canyon you don't really know is there unless you know it's there. And it's just really pretty. So places like that, and even the community college woods at Lamar Community College is a perennially interesting place, even though much of it is dominated by non-native plants. It still is, because of all the great cover, it's a fun one. I like places that are kind of along the state border, so out towards the Republican River, SWA, and the former Bonnie State Park region in Yuma County and along the Platte in some areas. So it's kind of neat because it's always an adventure going out there. You never know what you're going to find. And sometimes just going to these fabled places, is half the fun, even if it never quite pans out to some great bird. Here I am at Flagler, SWA. It's so wonderful. Birders are so weird, the craziest places become so dear to their hearts. Flagler, oh.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing about that. A question from Christopher. Are there new communities that are being developed that are working with you to develop the best habitat for birds?
Not necessarily working with me specifically, but there are a lot of opportunities for either for mitigation to impacts from developments or for kind of proactive developments. I can't really speak to the bigger picture. I'm grateful that where I live in Kent Carroll, here in Jefferson County, there was a lot of open space around drainages that was maintained as corridors and just a lot of open habitat that's preserved in the development context, which doesn't always happen. So there's definitely one of the big impacts to riparian habitat has been development of lands adjacent to streams, in addition to things like reservoirs and all that that can affect important elements, but just development of land around riparian,
Thank
something to be concerned about.
And last but not least, a note of gratitude from Susan. She said, great presentation helps me prep for the rest of migration.
All right, well, that's my theme in Bird Bomb's helpful burst of ID info. So thanks everybody. Thanks especially Gigi for helping out. And tune in for our next Bird Bombs on the 26th of June, Habitat Blast Prairie View. So some more beautiful Colorado birds and habitats to consider. Good night, everyone. See you.
Good night.